Museum, and we're just going to have a little conversation about the next decade for the church and really our hopes about the future. And we'll share a few words that exemplify for us what convention means.
The leaders of both houses are people of color, and it's empowering to see that we are moving away from the old archetypes of what leadership is, but also making the steps that we've talked about as well in many of our resolutions. One thing that stood out to me was when we rescinded William Portrait DuBose's feast day through the consent calendar. We didn't debate it. It was yep, we're taking this off because his history of racism. And while those who may want to stand for him would argue, well, look at he was the great theologian of his day and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, was your heart right? And we're making things right on our calendar. And I got to speak to Scott Moore, who's part of the Church of Europe, and the things they're doing. He said, for their meetings, there's a requirement. If it's 6 hours away from you, you have to take the train for ecological reasons. They're committing to the idea of being good stewards of this land. It's been a long time. It's been a slow train, but we're moving towards those values we've talked about as a church for so long, and we're finally putting them into action. There's still more to do, but as a first-time deputy, it was empowering.
The front and looking out at everybody, which was just such an honor and a privilege to be able to be part of that team in Austin and here in Baltimore. The difference I saw between Austin and here was, I want to call it a spirit of generosity, but I think it was more a move of the spirit where there was a little bit of disagreement, but nothing like I saw in Austin. That may have something to do with the size of the group or whatever. But folks stated their opinions, but it was in love and charity. And that was huge. And I really think that was different from Austin this time. And that may have to do with the fact that 50% of the deputies were replaced, often with younger people. And I think that just changed the flavor. I'm not saying we would love to have the other deputies, but I'm just saying it changed the flavor and tenor that I could see from the front, and it was exciting to watch and be a part of it.
And piggybacking on that, what I think we saw at this convention was a real generational shift.
Yes.
That my first convention was in 1997, and a lot of the people that were the leaders then are not, in some cases, not even living. And the fact that the former president of the House of Deputies, Gay Jennings, was quite clear in getting millennials and Gen X people as leaders for not only the legislative committees as General Convention, but also first-time deputies as chairs of the standing commissions and such, really showed it. And I just felt, as we went through this General Convention, this shift from the boomers to the Gen Xers and the millennials, and I just have such hope for the church with that. We have some incredible leaders.
This is Julia Ayala Harris, or some of us would say Julia, who is a Latina woman, and our vice chair is a Native American, and that's very exciting. The other thing I said earlier is that we now have a desk for women and LGBTQ people at the church center, and Luke mentioned the consent calendar, and we won't get into the weeds for those of you who don't know what that is, but there were a lot more happened on the consent calendar where things get voted for all at once. And one thing that went through that made no noise at all was a new feast day honoring the deaconesses of the 19th century of our church. Many people don't realize how powerful women were in the emergence of the church in the 19th century, and some women of color who were deaconesses. And now they're getting a feast day, and we're recognizing that powerful role they played long before women could be ordained in moving the church forward and saying, hey, we're not going to just sit and be the church of nothing, we're going to do stuff.
My first convention was 1991. And to build on a little something that Rob talked about, how he found a big difference between Austin and here. The difference between 1991 and this convention, you'd have to fly around the world to meet that difference. It was incredible. 1991 was so contentious. And now we've come to a place where we can look to the next 10 years. We don't have to have one foot in the last mess to try to pick up the other foot and get someplace else. We can pick up 2 feet and keep walking. And I'm excited. I hope I last the next 10 years because I'm not a young critter. But I am so thrilled for this church.
I have a lot of hope in how resilient and flexible and innovative this large body of people could be to make a 13-day conference go to 4. I mean, I think that that's a pretty remarkable thing in and of itself, and to do it in a way that brings us forward so far. So, like, overall, I think that was my impression. It was just great hope and really excitement for the future of our church.
So I was a first-time deputy this year as well, and I had a scrap of paper and taking quotes down, and 2 stuck out to me. One during the last president of House of Deputies said in one of her talks, in order to be followed, you have to know where you're going, or something like that. Do you remember when she said that? You have to have your vision. So, in her being, visionary, like we're here in this museum, she kind of led the path, and people followed. And then just today, the new president said, storytelling is redefining weeds and flowers. And I think that's going to be the future, is doing the work of listening to the stories and redefining what the flowers are and nurturing them.
For me, this was my 3rd time at General Convention. My first time was in Columbus, and I remember walking through the hall and having this sense of electricity come through. You know, this sense of some kind of great power coming through the buildings. And that was when Catherine Jefferson Shorey was elected. And this gathering held similar moments of just the power of being together and holding each other in compassion and patience. It seemed to me, especially on the other side of such isolation and really hard times with the pandemic, to be finally gathering, risky or not, was revitalizing, just simply being together. But then to have our being together so productive in doing the work, it was really wonderful for me. I'm grateful.
My first convention, I arrived and I was completely overwhelmed, and I was welcomed by Steve Smith, who many of you know, in my hotel, and grabbed and said, "You've got to come and have dinner at this table." And at that table were Gay Clark Jennings and Sally Johnson. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? I had no idea who these women were, and they ended up being the president and the chancellor of the House. So that was just this really odd moment for me. And I remembered that as Gay is retiring today. So it's just kind of just rather odd, sort of all the way around. This is a very hopeful, a very different convention for me. It's just the fact that 50%, or about 50% of the deputies were new this year, never been to a convention before, and I worked credentials desk where I checked people in and made sure that they were the right people and kept them, and just knowing that there was this fear in their eyes of what was coming, but this incredible hope for what our church could be, was just really wonderful to see, and to just be able to say to them, "You're going to be okay." So, and to have our new president and new vice president, people of completely different, with a person of color and an indigenous person is just so incredible to me. So I'm very, very hopeful for our future. I think we're going to be a church that's going to go on and do amazing things.
Seeing the people of North Texas and Texas on that stage together and all that represented was very powerful. And this is my 5th convention, and while I've loved them all, I had real reservations about how emotionally connected people were going to feel to one another with this intense schedule and many of the social opportunities that we would traditionally have not being possible. And yet I felt as close as ever, if not more so. I echo what the other deputies have said about a sense of hope, a sense of optimism, a sense of a new era happening. It was very emotional. The Texas and North Texas folks, all the tributes to Gay Jennings, to Byron Rushing, but especially to Gay. I walked away from saying my goodbyes to Gay with tears in my eyes. This is a beautiful church, and there is an inherent goodness in our people and a way that we identify with one another that may be unique specifically to us. And it's something that is hard to truly describe, although we're doing our best to do so. But it's one of those you really have to be here to know why some of us who have kept coming back would want to do it, because it is a lot of work, but it's so energizing too. And we have a wonderful, wonderful church.
To me, the value of the work of convention, which is not for everyone, is still very important. And it was, in fact, a stance about what the young man from Puerto Rico said about how he finally felt included in the church, and how Gay's long tenure in the church, she mentioned she and Del Glover were considered the liberal rabble-rousers. To see that and the wisdom that they bring. And so I also hope that those folks who are still able to contribute are also there as elders to help this next generation as they take up the reins.
I question how our structures work, and are they good for the church? And I have to say that as much as I've been skeptical of those things, that all the resolutions and canons and our way of our bicameral houses that keep us in order as a church, that I think that we actually use them with the help of the Holy Spirit in some really, really good, impactful ways this week, and moving us into the future. And so I'm not dreading sitting for many hours with my colleagues and knowing that there are others, lay people and priests and others in another section of some building somewhere the next time, continuing to work on making our church more responsive to the world and led by the Holy Spirit. Bye.
Bye.
Maybe we should say bye. Okay. Oh wait, do it again.
Bye.